Hello again, this is Paul Benjamin Lowry. I'm pleased to introduce this special video series for the Interdisciplinary Research channel. In this series, I'm focusing on excellent PhD student presentations that have been given by PhD students. In this case, this is a presentation by Fei Wang, a third-year PhD student. And he's discussing the important research issue of multi-level theorizing. And I thought this was an excellent illustration both of explaining multi-level theorizing cogently, but providing excellent graphics and illustrations to work through it. So without further ado, I will give a brief musical shout out and introduction to Fei Wang, and then we'll go right into his presentation, which is also available on SlideShare.
Training session today is about the introduction to multi-level theorizing. And first, I'd like to give credits to these following authors listed below. And this training session is developed based on the materials they provided in their journals. And that I will combine some of the concepts to talk about some of the basics of multi-level theorizing. So specifically, our learning objectives today include the following three questions. The first question is, what is multi-level theorizing and why should we care about it, right? The second question with the learning objective is, what level issues should we know about multi-level theorizing? So we'll take a look at the three major issues there. And lastly, we're gonna take a look at how should we conduct multi-level theorizing using a systematic framework. So I hope this kind of like workshop can help you if you are thinking about doing a multi-level theorizing project in the future. So first, let's start with the first question. So what is this thing and why should we care about it? So first, I like to kind of give you kind of like a mini case to kind of an opening case to think about this kind of like a kind of real life kind of situation. So you wish to investigate whether or how an increase in individual productivity after implementing IT. Here, IT is kind of vague. It can represent anything. For example, let's use like a collaborative system such as SharePoint in this case, right? So your company has implemented this, collaboration system, that you want to take a look at whether an increase in individual productivity might lead to an increase in performance at the department level, as well as the organizational level. Now, if you look at this research kind of question, it's more complex than some of the projects we have done in the past. In those projects, we predominantly focus on the individual level, right? So at the very bottom, this is usually what we focused on, right? What factors might affect the emergence of individual level IS success, right? Okay. But in this case, we have to move up, right? So at the department level, when we look at the individual interactions within the department, or in the, it can be a team, right? It can be another group. So how might this affect, the performance, right? Like department level. And if we move up again, if at the organizational level, how organizational structures or like governance policies might affect IT department success or individual IT use behaviors. So if you look at this type of theorizing, it's more complex, right? The complexity has increased with these different levels in this kind of hierarchical structure. And we can actually extend this to many other levels, such as in this case, you can look at the industry, right, level, or you can look at the national level or even international level. That will make your research project much more complex. So in this case, we need this multi-level theorizing, right? We need to understand what is this thing? How can we use this to look at this type of research problem? So by definition, a multi-level perspective is defined as an approach to theory development that considers the relevance of multi-level analysis. In this case, if you look at this diagram, we have several levels, right, in this hierarchical structure. Now, the focus here is to do the level of analysis, which is about the conceptual entity. In this case, you have the individual, department, organization, and industry, right? So we want to look at these guys under the theoretical and the empirical investigation, right? So when we are doing your research problem, all these different levels should be looked at. And so what should we care about this? What are some of the benefits, why this is so important? So several authors talk about there are kind of four major benefits or the things that will help us when we're doing the theory building with this type of approach. Number one, it offers an effective means to integrate theory. So in this case, you might have individual level theory, department level theory, organizational level theory. You can integrate these different levels, right, for your analysis. Number two, linking theories at separate levels helps build a coherent and integrated research field, right? And number three, theory integration across levels might create research opportunities. I think that's important for us. Actually, for my project, I'm thinking about using this maybe in the future, because at this point, when I'm looking at the recommendation agent, I'm looking at the individual level, right? How would recommendation agent affect customers' perceptions and their adoptions? So maybe I can look at that at the department level or organizational level, how a company can benefit from using these recommendation agents, right? Cross board, different departments, different functional areas, right? So I think that can be a good perspective to look at. And lastly, it represents a more natural and complete way of examining phenomena. So here is an example why this is relevant to us. So for example, here we're looking at a study, right? I think from the TAM model, one of the focuses is to look at the ease of use at the individual level. You want to create an artifact that will make it so simple for users to use. But if you look at the organizational level, that might not be true. That might not be your objective, because you want to implement these cutting edge technologies such as these ERP systems, right? Enterprise resource planning systems, which are very complex, and it takes time for users to, to learn and use these technologies. So if you look at that, there is a difference, right? Okay, between your objectives and these different levels. So by using multi-level theorizing, you can actually harmonize and integrate these theories, right? Okay, to make this more, more coherent and integrated. So I hope this example kind of give you some ideas how multi-level theorizing can help us in the future. So this is kind of like a 3,000 feet overview of what multi-level theorizing is about. Next, so what are some of the level issues? Now here the keyword is level, right? So it's about the hierarchical structure. So this is kind of like a traditional organizational theory, right? We have individuals, they have their characteristics, they have their different personalities, they have their different expertise. But when we put them in groups, okay, you have to look at the dynamics in groups, interactions among users in these different groups. So for example, you have group 1, you might have a group 2, group N, multiple groups. This can be a team, can project team, this can be a functional area, such as accounting, finance, manufacturing, right, those kind of things. And they will form an organization. So in this case, if you look at the, the issues, the number one issue is, okay, what level of theory you're looking at, right? So this is a very important question when we're doing multi-level theorizing. So this is about describing the target, in this case, individual, group, organization, that a theorist aims to depict and explain. So the goal here is you need to specify the level to which generalizations are made. And also, there are 3 very important explicit, implicit assumptions we need to look at when we create these multi-level theories. Number 1 is homogeneity, right? It's about group of members which are sufficiently similar with respect to the construct, right? Are they similar or not? If that's the case, right, we can characterize those guys as a whole thing. Okay, for example, like group 1, group 2. You can also look at the independence, okay? In this group, individual members, are they independent of the group influence or not, right? And number 3, we can take a look at heterogeneity, right? So individual within groups, this is kind of like our within group analysis, which focus on individual attributes relative to the group, right? Like average, right? And the, for this attribute. So some other terms we use probably are familiar with, okay, within group effects. Another one which I think is a good metaphor we talk about, right? It's a frog pound effects, okay, and party effects. Basically, these effects are about comparative or relative effects when we look at an individual within a group, right? So for example, one frog might be a big guy in 1 pound, but if you put this frog in a new pound, this might be a smaller guy, right? That will have different effects. And then other considerations, okay, we need to look at when we look at this multi-level things is first is top-down versus bottom-up. So if you look at the top-down effect, this is about the influence of higher constructs on lower entities. For example, group, right, versus individual, and organization versus groups. And then another direction you can look at is bottom-up effect, right? Okay, how would these lower entities, okay, contribute, right, to that effects, okay? So that is one perspective we can look at, and later we can look at the typology. That is actually one of the factors they look at, the direction of the effects. Then another one we can take a look at is mono versus combined effects. So these are some of the new terms used by some of the authors in these articles, but essentially they're similar to some of the statistical kind of effects we learned in the past, such as direct main effects versus interaction. So like combined effects is kind of like a couple of things, they interact with each other, they come combined effects on the lower or upper level, okay? And then lastly, okay, are these effects equally or unequally distributed? The example will be, would this implementation of collaborative system have the same effect on the individual? First, I'd explain the issue 1, this is about level of theory, right? This is a very important thing we need to look at. And number 2, this is about, the data collection, different levels, level of the measurement, right? So there are 2, important data collection strategies we can consider. It's basically a simple decision and condition. Whether your level of theory is precisely specified or not. If it is, then we can use this strategy to ensure conformity, okay? So one example would be if you know, right, where you specify that your within group members are homogeneous, they're very similar, then we can collect global or group level data that varies only between groups. So we're looking at between groups effects, right? So this is one strategy. Another one is if your theory is vague or is open to question, then you can use the second data collection strategy, that is to test predictions, right? So you want to test the fit of data to the level of theory. And lastly, issue 3, this is about data analysis, level of statistical analysis, right? Okay, so there are 2 very important objectives we're trying to achieve. Number 1 is about aligning level of analysis to level of theory. So if you're looking at your theory, looking at your members within these groups, are these homogeneous group, homogeneous group, or they're independent, individuals? If these members are homogeneous, then we can choose to use global group level scores or individual level scores aggregated. So aggregation here is a very important thing. We don't want to look at averages, right, instead of individual scores. But if your theory, the assumption is these individuals are independent, as we mentioned earlier, then you can choose to use unaggregated or individual scores to look at the data, right? And the second important objective is to look at the conformity of data to the level of theory. So usually when we go into this type of multi-level kind of theorizing, you have some predictions. So there are two predictions which are very important in this process. Number one is the prediction of the members within groups. Are these members homogeneous, independent, or heterogeneous? Right. Number two, you want to look at the prediction of the relationships among these constructs as a function of these above three things, right? So when you're doing your data measuring, okay, you want to take a look at whether your data measuring the construct of the theory supports these two very important predictions. If so, then you can say, I have this conformity of data to the level of theory. So this is a very important concept, right, in one of these articles. Okay, then the third thing we are going to talk about is how do we do this then, right? So we talk about, what is this thing, what are some of the issues or, of levels, then how do we do multi-level theorizing using a systematic framework? So this one is, from John and Gable's paper, okay, they have a very nice framework which includes 4 major steps, right? Okay, step one, this is about specifying focal single level theory. So basically we start with some, simple level, one level, don't look at multiple levels yet, okay? Now in this step, we need to clarify the focal phenomena of interest with a construct or a relationship. Okay, number two, take a look at some dependent variables. This is very similar to our theorizing project, right? If you take a look at that. Also, you explore whether there's a suitable existing single level theory, reference theory, right? For example, you want to remain open, basic flexibility, okay, to new independent variables as theorizing unfolds. So that is the first step. Second step, we need to take a look at the candidate theoretical entities at multiple levels, right? Okay, so usually what you can do is take a look at the focal identity and entities, larger contexts such as organization, institution, groups, things like that, or granular, counterparts, for example, like individual level. Then you want to narrow down the candidate theoretical entities based on the holistic consideration of factors such as your research question, right? Your reference theories, your data available, right? Your research interests, for example, those kind of things. And then third step, you want to clearly articulate rules that define candidate entities and justify the existing of candidate entities. For example, like a principle to define what is collectiveness in this kind of collaboration system, right? Okay, and then you want to take a look at the IT artifact and see whether it supports some of your theory there. Then step three, this one I think is kind of interesting. So they're talking about using zoom in and zoom out strategies. A metaphor here I like to use, or analogy I like to use, is a camera lens, right? So everybody has taken some photos with your cameras. So when you're taking a photo, you can zoom in and zoom out to take a look at the objects in different perspectives. So for zoom in, basically, we want to look at the focal entity, right? Like these individual guys, and see, some of the interesting, phenomena surrounding these, individual entities. It can zoom out to consider both the focal entities, like here, if you look at the focal entity actually moves, right? Depending on where is your lens, okay? And then lastly, you can tentatively present possible, right, top-down or bottom-up effects revealed by these zoom-in, zoom-out strategies. So basically, I think this is kind of technique, right, to take a look at these individual entities and the surrounding kind of environment, right? Okay, and see whether there are some, interesting, questions to look at. And lastly, this part probably is the most difficult in terms of, the work needed, right, to specify the top-down or bottom-up effects. Okay, so there are quite a few things to do. So I will go over this very quickly. First one is about what kinds, of top-down inference or bottom-up, contribution to the likelihood of the interaction. Okay, number two, you want to take a look at whether the top-down inference or bottom-up contribution applied equally. We'll talk about that earlier, right? Equal distribution, is that equal distributed effects or that is unequally distributed effects. Number three, you want to take a look at whether top-down inference or bottom-up contribution is targeted at a construct or a relationship, right? So, usually basically it's about, is this a main effect? If you look at from a statistic perspective, or this is more like a moderation kind of effect, right? Something like that. And then you want to specify the exact top-down or bottom-up effects and present relevant theoretical empirical justifications, okay? And this part is pretty hard to do. And the authors have provided a very nice topology, which I will talk about, in the next, right? To see these different models you can use, right? To think about your multi-level theorizing project. And lastly, you need to consider, alternative conceptualizations of top-down and bottom-up effect. So this is kind of like a framework. I think it's a pretty hands-on framework, and we can use this, right, to conduct multi-level theorizing project. Okay, so one of the major contributions of John and Gable's paper is this very interesting typology of multi-level phenomena. I think that's very helpful. So when I'm thinking about typology of my research paper, I think this is actually very interesting. There are a lot of things to learn, how they create something like this. So essentially, they create a typology using these different factors. Number one is about direction. They use two distinctive look at two distinctive theoretical effects. Top down, right, which is about where a lower level is regulated, constrained, or reinforced by a higher level, or bottom up, which is where a higher level emerges, emerge from or is sustained by a lower level, right? So they look at top down or bottom up, separate that by using the direction. Number two, they look at the type of effects, and they have identified 8 types, basically 8 models that you can use to do your theories using multi-level kind of a building technique. And they also look at 2 levels, basically no effects, right? So they label top down from 1 to 4 using the Roman letters or Roman numbers. They label the bottom up, from number 5 to number 8, right? So they kind of identified 8 models here. Then they look at the different kinds or two kind of variants of effects, right, within each top down or the bottom up. They look at model effects we talked about earlier, that combined effect. Here I provide you with kind of an example. If you look at a model effect, now here is when we look at a group culture and group size, right, both of them can independently affect individual performance. Now we look at the combined effect. This is about interaction. You can look at the group culture and group size interact, with each other, and when they're combined to affect individual performance, right? So you can take a look at these two. And then they look at the amount. That's about the equally distributed effects or unequally distributed effects we talked about earlier. They kind of, incorporate that concept into their typology. And then target, this is about whether you're looking at the variance of a construct. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of similar to the main effect, right? Direct main effect we're looking at statistically. And then they look at also the occurrence on the magnitude of a relationship, right? This is, more like the moderation effects, right? Looking at the, for example, like organizational IT training, right? This can moderate, right? They, the extent to which individual IT use, which is one of the construct, promotes individual performance, right? So you can take a look at the direct effect. One construct has the effect on another construct, or you can take a look at a moderation effect, right? Focusing on relationships. And lastly, I think this part is really interesting. They came up with a kind of, these mini model diagrams, right? To kind of, explain these possible models, right? So here you can take a look at how they did this. I think it's very, very interesting. So they use the dashed line to represent levels. They use these letters, lower level, higher level, to represent different construct and different levels. And then they talk about these different possible relationships. Here, for example, you can take a look at, there is a construct at higher level which has some effect, right, or influence this lower entity, right, Y, which is at lower level. This one is about that moderation, right? Okay, two types of target. This is a target construct. This one is targeting the relationship, right? So this is like the moderator at the higher level, which has a moderation effect on this relationship between the lower X and the lower Y. Now, this one is more about the combined effect, right? Have a function, it's kind of like about the interaction, right? So does this interaction have, we have a combined effect on a lower level construct, right? This one, the same thing. Does this combined effect have some, influence on this relationship at the lower construct? So they use these simple letters, symbols, to kind of depict these possible multi-level theorizing archetype models. I think it's kind of interesting. So lastly, they kind of present this very interesting topology of multi-level phenomena. And here you can take a look at how they kind of, summarize, right, these different models based on their topology. You can take a look at directions. Okay, have the top down and the bottom up. Then you have these four types under top down and 4 types under bottom up. And then each one will have a null, basically no, top down or no bottom up effect. And then they can look at under each model, okay, under each top down, they look at the different kinds, right? Model where this is a combined, right? Which look at an interaction. They also look at the distribution of the effect, equally distributed or unequally distributed. And then under target, look at either this is look at the construct or this look at the relation. And they use these kind of mini diagrams to illustrate these different charts. Okay, so all right, so that's, I think that my time is up. So that is pretty much about the multi-level
So I apologize for cutting Jeremy's discussion portion of his presentation off. I do so for privacy purposes of the audience members. But I wanted to finish by thanking Jeremy again for this excellent presentation and cogent description of multi-level theorizing. Following this slide, I'll provide a full bibliography of the excellent works that he so cogently integrated. And please don't forget that the actual slides are also available freely on SlideShare. So please send us any thoughts or feedback or comments as you see fit. I hope this was helpful.